Yeah? And the question is, if you're setting up a virtual team or if you're part of a virtual team, how are you going to make sure that these two ways of being have mutual respect? We've got to respect the people who are different from us and who work in slightly different ways. If we're sitting with them in a restaurant or if we're sharing an office space with them, that respect will naturally grow. But if we're working in virtual space, if we're communicating by email and in chat rooms and in social networking sites and all the rest of it, we have to be very specific about transmitting warmth, indicating that we're listening and understanding, saying message received and understood, and there is lots and lots of space for reassurance. Polarities again. Am I talking to somebody who wants to take individual responsibility for himself, or should I be talking to a person about him as part of the team? When I say to somebody, do you know something? I've stayed on a little bit late today so that I can have a conversation with you over there in the States. Or alternatively, I got up really early this morning so I can have a conversation with you out there in Korea. Now, is the other person going to say, yes, that's perfectly normal? Or is he going to say, hey, that's a real surprise, because speaking for myself, I don't know how you find this in Germany, Edward, speaking for myself, I like to keep work and life separate. What would you say as a North American living in Germany? Would you say in general that in organizations, in businesses, German managers make a separation between work and life, or that they, or is there a big overlap? What's your feeling?
Well, I would say compared to what, right? Because in America, I think work and life is a bit more intertwined than it is in Germany. That's just a personal opinion, but I'd say the Americans sometimes forget when to turn it off. Where in Germany, I think the culture says, no, we turn it off. We're more human.
Well, that's beautiful, and that matches my perception. And you said the important thing there when you said, of course, it's all relative, because we're not talking here about, you know, a set of absolutes from which maybe people deviate. Yeah? I mean, I know some parts of the world where that is how they look at life. But I think generally we here in let's say in liberal Europe, and working that liberal model in the places to which we're typically outsourcing these days, the assumption is that there's going to be a certain amount of flexibility, but that people don't like to be obsessive about work. Yeah, it's a balance. More polarities. We can talk about power, we can talk about risk-taking, we can talk about how much people like to boast about their individuality, and masculinity is quite an interesting idea. Do I drive a big fast car to prove that I'm a success? It's that kind of stuff. And sometimes, guess what, the polarities are even diagonal. Am I doing this work because it develops me as a person, or am I doing this work because it will be good for my community? And these polarities, these opposites among us are a very important part of the game. Looking at corporate cultures, looking at tell me, Edward, when did you first hear the word culture being applied to businesses and organizations rather than nationalities?
Probably when I met you.
I first started being aware of it. People started saying, you know, that's not our culture. You know, I think probably it was about 15, 18 years ago, back in the early, middle 90s, I was hearing it. The idea was always there, but using the word culture in that context, I think it was that period. Please, you were saying.
Well, I mean, there's always been the underlying thought of company culture, and it's been more an implicit statement than an explicit statement. And it's really, I would say, only in the last 5 or 7 years that I began the concept of a company culture is something that is far more distinctly expressed and cultivated. Now, perhaps it's the fact that the last couple of years I've worked in an environment that's made me very sensitive to that. However, I think in general the environment is becoming more aware of organizations having this specific culture as much as a country does.
Yeah. I think that's right. And I mean, I keep speaking about India. I'm going to come back to it again in a moment. I've got some good friends out there in their middle 30s now, early, touching 40, some of them, who've spent most of their working lives within techno parks, if you know what a techno park is. I mean, picture in your mind an out-of-town business park, an out-of-city business park with a dozen, 15, 20 corporations present, and lots of nice tea shops and restaurants and 10,000 motor scooters parked outside. And these friends of mine, they can, every year or two within the techno park, they move and work with a different corporation. And they're very, very clever and very, very adaptable, saying, okay, fine, right now I'm working for a German bank, so I'm going to work in that German bank kind of culture. But my friend, he's just gone and he's now working for, an American soft drinks company. And that's kind of different, but we've got to learn different ways of fitting in. There is a general idea of how you can describe a company culture. Do the ideas come from the center outwards, if you look at the bottom of the screen there, or is it a much more liberal, distributed kind of feeling? You and I were talking about earlier today about a certain international accountancy company and how they had a clash within themselves when they merged, because one of the companies liked to see itself as a very decentralized democratic company. The other was all about command and control. And then we've got the question of the formality and the informality, not only of the way you dress, but of the way you make decisions, of how much respect you pay to somebody's business card, of whether the boss has a big corner office and a secretary to protect him, all of that kind of stuff. Broadly, and I borrowed this data from a guy called Fons Trompenaars, who's very famous in the field. This is the kind of setup you will see. If we got a couple of listeners, a couple of people in the conference here, I think from Germany. If I click back one slide, you'll see that the norm, the standard here, is that a German corporation is going to be formal and centralized. In the opposite corner, our friends the Swedes are more likely to be decentralized and informal, and that certainly has been broadly my experience, but there are many, many exceptions. I've been in virtual teamwork terms. I've got two current projects. One of them is an ongoing project with a big telecommunications company based in Sweden, where I'm helping them with their virtual team enterprise looking towards India. The other is a recent development over the last couple of weeks. I've been taken on board by a big insurance global company who work out of the UK, but they've got a strong presence in Germany, and those two corporate headquarters are beginning to outsource some of their work. They've got 300 people out there in Bangalore, and I've been helping the guys here in Europe, well, basically to decide how they're going to play the game when they get out there and start bringing these people into the company. Here's a table of stuff about the UK and India. I don't propose to read it all the way through, but this is extracted actually from 3 or 4 days' work I did with a British Indian virtual team when I had the privilege of getting them together for 2 or 3 days at a conference before the whole thing was booted. And these are the ideas that they produced to describe their difference.